church probably has ever done the story that way, because what happens in the end? Yeah, you already knew that, so you don't have to hear that part of the story. But I wanted to keep that kind of weird segue in there to show you what a boy David is. He's not just small. He's 8 or 10 years old. And he does not remotely, he has to keep asking this question, what is the prize? Because the answer to the prize is a wife, yuck. Not paying taxes, what's a tax? He doesn't care about taxes. He brought cheese sandwiches to his brothers, and maybe that's a decent prize. But I brought that part in there for Kristen because it is hard work going from a boy to trying to practice being a man. Now, I'm going to say that again for any of the boys in here who are 8 or 10 or 48. It is hard. It is confusing work trying to practice being the man that we want to be. And that is why back in November, we put on the agenda. There's a lot going on. Right after November is this thing called Christmas, and then there was turkey, and then there was Easter, and then there's anniversary, so it's been busy. But we put on the agenda to put a men's group together in the church. The Presbyterian denomination has this great thing for women, a Presbyterian women, and we have a chapter of that here, and it works wonderful. And they've been inviting men to some of their events lately, which is great, thank you. And after we get through this celebration, men, we're going to figure out how to draw some supportive cadre together. And when I hear the same question 3 times, it means a bunch of people have the question, and it means I should address it. It's the same question 3 times. So there's a lot of tangents in this sermon. You can hold on to David and Goliath, but he's a boy trying to be a man. When I hear the same questions, what is the focus at Community of Grace? What's the point of what we're doing here? Some churches, you go to church and the focus is something like discipleship. It's about you becoming a better person, and they define better however they want, and sometimes that's transformative, and sometimes better just means vote like the pastor says to vote, right? It can be ugly. It can be shameful. It can be guilt-ridden, and that's not us. Some churches, the point is we're going to get you from here to get you to heaven. And that's not our point either here. Some churches, it's service to your neighbors, great. Building community together, great. Learning about the Bible, great. All kinds of things. Our focus at COG, do you know what it is not? Our focus is not, some people, Barb's going to turn her head in a second. It's not social justice. It's not. That's a great thing. In fact, social justice is defined as one of the 6 reasons why a church in the Presbyterian world, our Constitution says one of the 6 things we're doing here is social justice. But that's not like the lens. That's not us. That's not what we're aiming for. The lens by which one looks at what God is doing in the world and our experience of the divine in our life could be liberation. Liberation. One way to understand that word love as a principle of doing life well is liberation. Now, social justice is the way of putting society, if God was in charge and God snapped God's fingers and said, this is the way society is, our job, in order to do that, that's social justice. Doing it in society as God would make it just right. And so is supporting addicts. And so is supporting personal transformation. And so is offering programs for kids and teenagers who are bombarded by the difficulties of life. And so is making room for groups of people who are liberated from their stress and their loneliness and their confusion. So our goal here, as long as I have the privilege of serving this church, is to create a tiny little model to making it on earth as it is in heaven. And that is liberation from so many of the struggles and confusions and doubts and anxieties of life on earth. And that is liberation to so much of the grace and the peace and the love that transcends our mere humanity. In the best church programs, we're doing both. In the best sermons, we're doing both of those. So in this sermon, that's just your first tangent. You'll have a few more today. David is a boy. He's a boy full of struggles, full of confusions, full of anxieties about growing up. Now, what does not help in that process is a bunch of older brothers who are a pain. How many of you in this room are the oldest of your brothers and sisters? Okay. How many of you are the youngest? Okay, you can look at each other. You can look at each other and know that they treated someone just like you got treated. Younger ones, you got treated like junk. Older ones, you did the treating. It's not fair. And you did a good job of putting the intonation in there because the older brother says, "What are you doing here, David?" And David says, "Gosh, what have I done now? I was just asking a question," which is the exact words, just in a different. When I said it, when I say it in my head, it sounds like Napoleon Dynamite. Yeah. Ooh, yeah, what are you doing? Gosh, just trying. Yeah. Napoleon Dynamite is a story about a really awkward younger brother who becomes a hero by taking down a champion. He has a quesadilla, and David brought cheese sandwiches. David likes to dance. He gets in trouble for dancing. Napoleon likes to dance. David takes care of sheep. Napoleon takes care of a llama. I think we're on a roll here. I think we should have a movie night for something. But I want you to enter the story. We all grew up as kids. 9-foot giant, 4-foot little kid. Great, okay. Don't enter the story just that way. Don't enter the story with a surprisingly accurate description of 11th century tribal warfare and armaments. I'm sure that's how all of you read it, but that's there. It's kind of weird that it's so right on. Don't enter the story just with the history or the metaphor of the complexity between Israel and the Philistines, where we get the word Palestine. So if you want to go over there now and see what they're fighting about, it's stories like these boundaries right here. I want you to enter this story not just with the easy-to-relate feeling of being overwhelmed by fear, but this story is about a boy who feels stuck. He feels left out. He can never please his dad. He can never live up to his older brothers. We know later that this boy loves poetry. He loves to dance. He doesn't know how to become a man in the way everyone else is becoming a man. This is a story about us feeling hopeless and helpless, and we are terrified that we are on the wrong track. I meant my life to go here, and I'm over here, and I don't know how to get off of that. Terrified. This is us being terrified that we don't know the way out. We're terrified that there's nowhere to belong, nothing to believe in, and so we behave by digging that hole deeper and deeper until it feels like the whole world is a 9-foot-tall giant taunting us. And this is a story about being liberated from that, liberated from the gnawing fear that the world doesn't need us, and that we don't matter, and we never will. Mostly it's a story about how we cannot do the liberating on our own. But God is in the business of being right in those spots and healing what haunts us and pointing us to a peace in ourselves, a joy with our lives, and hope for the future. But of course, we only read half the story. You know, we fast forward. If you fast forward all the way to the end, you know he wins. But right after what Kristen read, the next thing that happens, does anyone know the next thing that happens right after the taunting? The king calls over a little boy. That's impossible. That would never happen. And he lets him go fight Goliath, which is ridiculous because if Goliath wins, they all become slaves. So that's nonsense. And Saul even offers him the king's armor, which is never going to happen. It sounds like a comedic parable, but I want to frame it like a child's daydream, right? The kid who's lost, whose brothers just picked on him, whose dad doesn't accept him, who doesn't know what he's doing with his life, and he's just daydreaming about beating up a giant. And maybe it really happened because the story was written down in something like the 6th century, but the details that fit in the 11th century tell me that something about this story actually happened, and it was told for 500 years. But in the whole, it sure sounds like a kid just walking and kicking rocks because he wants to solve a problem he can't solve. It just sounds like a story of what we all do when we had that conflict in the day, and then we come back and we think, oh, I should have said that. Or, we're angry at our boss, and you think, oh, I could have done that differently, and you come up with a solution later. What happens next is Saul lets him go out there, and David and Goliath, they have a little trash talk. A couple weeks ago, we talked about Elijah having trash talk, and this one, Goliath says, am I a dog that you come at me with a stick? And then little David says back, you come at me with a sword and a spear, but the Lord will conquer you, and I'll cut off your head. Okay? It's really great, actually, in the Hebrew. It's great poetry. I can't do it justice up here, but it is exactly what we do when we're daydreaming about that perfect comeback after some conflict. What I should have said to the bully. And then what happens? Goliath comes at David, and what does he bring out? What does David bring out? Slingshot. Not this kind of slingshot, this kind of slingshot. Okay, he spins it. Boom. Okay. Why does the slingshot matter, and how does it fit into my daydream story here? When boys, they watch sheep. That's what you do. When you're 8 years old, you're out in the field watching sheep. Okay, and they might dream about fighting wolverines. Yet another Napoleon Dynamite connection. But they don't. What they really do is they keep the sheep together. Sheep are really dumb, and they'll just wander off and do whatever they want. And so what the boys do is they take all day, every day, what their whole job is to take a slingshot, pick up a little stone. They don't hit the sheep. You don't hit your animal. You throw the stone, boop, and it scares the sheep, and the sheep comes back. Okay? They do that all day long. So if you want like slingshot Olympics, you choose an 8-year-old Hebrew boy, or in any culture like that. He's pulling this out. It's not a weapon. It's a toy. It's a little bit of a tool. So David is dreaming about his encounter with dissatisfied life. Of course he uses the only tool he knows to try to win this battle in his own heart. And when we are dreaming about getting our lives back on track, we envision these little, we know a little bit. We know that if we want to lose weight, if we just switch out Diet Coke for regular Coke, that's going to do it, right? It's a little tool. If we want to get control of our schedule, my Facebook, I don't watch a lot of Facebook. If I take it off my phone, then I'm going to solve everything, and I'll be more present for all my relationships. If I know I'm angry all the time, if I just go to a counselor once, maybe twice, then she's going to fix me, and it'll be great. We do the same thing as David, that we daydream these little solutions to our deep, gnawing problems. And yet we know, in the end, David does win. And somewhere between David winning and David being totally lost, somewhere in there, Goliath taunts him for how many days? 40 days. 40 days, which raises the question, what is that 40 doing smack in the middle of the story? How is it expressing some idea of this is all filled up and we're ready for this new thing? How does it serve as this symbolic representation from disoriented to reoriented? Because it does that every other time in the Bible, so it must be doing that here. So a couple ideas. That 40 taunting might be about, hey, your fear has held you back long enough. It's done enough damage. It's time to step forward. It's time to trust that God is with you in the things that you have to face. Some of you have been taunted with something for so long, and maybe this is your call to trust that you can face it with God on your side. Or that 40 might be about strategizing. Now consider King Saul. What if this story really did happen this way? What if, be a biblical literalist for a moment. What if Saul rested his army for 40 days, them knowing the symbolic power of that 40, and then what if Saul puts his armor on this little kid so that when the giant kills a little kid, like their mascot, the army is going to be ramped up and mad, and so they're going to take off and do amazing things. So is this a story about Saul scheming and actually planning for victory and for an improved life? Would it take us 40 days to create some new habits and to get some control over the bad habits in our life? Maybe. Is this a story about patience when we are hurting? Or is this 40 days, just the writer, is it merely giving you a hint that in this drama, in this despair, in whatever we face, maybe in surprising ways, maybe in profane ways, God's presence will show up. When we are so filled up with our own problems, God's presence will show up. I don't know which 40 is intended, but the beauty of good storytelling is the layers, where it might mean something for you and mean something different for you. The beauty of David and Goliath is not simply that the little beats the big, although that's a trope in our literature, and the neuroscientists say that most of us even have that in our brain. But another beauty of this story is the subtle invitation to take all that fear, all that loneliness, all that confusion that we carry, and in some way you are invited to give it to God and to trust God to do something with it. You may not knock the giant out in one swing, but with a little trust in God, in yourself, and in the power of the Spirit through you, with a little trust, your worst fears will not bury you. With a little trust, something meaningful may come out of this. And I believe you can face those great and deep fears, and I believe that you and God can do battle against them. Amen.